Hey, welcome back. If you're like most people I work with, this is the module you've been truly waiting for, the 5 elements of the straight line system. This is where I actually break down the straight line for you into its most basic elements, and also show you the basic tools of human influence that we use to actually take someone down the straight line, as the phrase goes, from the open to the close. Now, who's ever had a sale that was absolutely perfect, a laydown where they were almost pre-sold before you opened up your mouth? We all had those, right? The problem is that those sales are far and few between. Typically what happens is your prospect tries to take you off the straight line and take control of the actual conversation. So what we have are these actual boundaries here and here, above and below the line. When you're within these boundaries, you're in control of the sale. When you're outside the boundaries, the client's in control of the sale, and they're talking about whatever they want to talk about, which could be the price of tea in China, politics in America, their latest objection, whatever it might be, a stall, and you're not influencing anymore because they're the ones who are in control. Now, when you're in control, which is where you absolutely must be, it does not mean not letting your clients speak. In fact, it's the exact opposite. But the key is to actually control the flow of the encounter. If you're in the boundaries, here and here, you're in control. If you're outside the boundaries, then they're in control, and you've gone off into Pluto or down here, which is your anus, which is not a very good place to be if you want to influence. So you're trying to keep them on this straight line, moving them from the open to the close. In essence, what the straight line is, it's a visual representation of the perfect sale, where they say yes to basically everything you say. You ask them a question, they're like, oh yeah, it sounds great. Ask them another question, they're like, oh, of course, yeah, perfect, terrific, absolutely. You give them the price of your product, they're like, well, that sounds pretty reasonable. Here's my credit card information, and that's that. That's the perfect straight line conversation. It's almost a one-sided conversation with a perfect lay-down client where you're presenting and they're simply agreeing with everything you say. But that's not the way it really works in sales, now is it? You see, you have these spaces here and here, above and below the line. These are your healthy boundaries. Believe it or not, right in here, boom, boom, that's where all the magic happens, when you're actually off the straight line, right in these spaces. In fact, there are not just one, but 2 absolutely crucial things happening here. First, number 1, you're developing immediate, massive rapport with your prospect on both the conscious and an unconscious level. And second, you're using that rapport to gather massive intelligence. Point of fact, when you're gathering intelligence from a prospect, you're looking at all of the following things. Number 1, you're identifying their needs, and this includes not just their primary need or their problem, so to speak, but also any secondary, ancillary needs they might have, any core beliefs they might have that might impact the sale. You're looking to identify their values, their standards, their past experiences with similar products, their past experiences with other salespeople, where they stand financially, and of course, where their pain is, precisely. And then, if necessary, amplifying that pain. Now, I'll go into this in intimate detail in the prospecting module. I'm going to hand you this entire chunk of content literally on a silver platter. So again, when you're off the line, you're looking to A, number 1, to continue to build that massive rapport you already have, and B, use that rapport to help you gather massive intelligence. And at the same time, you're making sure that the encounter stays within the boundaries as you slowly but surely continue the process of moving down the straight line towards the close. Essentially, those are the 3 tenets of the front half of the straight line. Let me repeat them again. Number 1, first, you must get into instant massive rapport on both the conscious and an unconscious level. 2, you then use that rapport to essentially lubricate the intelligence gathering process, which includes both identifying his needs and uncovering his pain. And 3, you must control the sale by not letting it go outside the boundaries to either Pluto or your anus. Now remember, like I said in the intro, you have that very strong good enough factor with the straight line. So if you become even reasonably proficient at it, you're going to find yourself with a massive increase in your closing rate, and also you'll be setting yourself up for a massive number of referrals. Now, real quick, before I go any further, let me just give you another quick caution here about ethics. Remember, the straight line is a really powerful tool. It's actually one of those rare things that works better in the real world than it does on paper. So if you become even reasonably good at it, you can easily get people to do things they shouldn't do, buy things they shouldn't buy, or buy more of what they should buy. Like maybe your customer needs a bag of soil, but you end up using the straight line to sell them a dump truck of it, right? Get the picture? Always remember your ethics and your integrity, and never sacrifice either for the sake of making a sale. Okay, so here's the deal. When I first started working at that penny stock firm many years ago, calling people who had no money, basically moms and pops with little or no net worth, right? Then about 8 months later, when I opened up my own firm and I found that murky middle ground, which was selling $5 stocks to the richest 1% of Americans, then boom, just like that, the thing took off like a rocket. Well, basically, it was an untapped market niche I found, and by teaching my brokers the straight line system, it was so effective that it almost became ridiculous. It fed on itself, and it fed on itself, it kept feeding on itself, and before I knew it, I had almost 1,000 people working for me, all in one massive room, and all of them were using the straight line at the highest possible level and closing basically anyone who was closable. And the whole thing went just absolutely wild. Now, that's the short story. In real life, though, it didn't quite happen that instantly. There was a bit of a lag in the beginning when I was training my guys using my old methods. And they were still great at the time, but they weren't that magic bullet I needed to take my guys that really weren't that sharp and turn them into world-class closers. But still, every morning, every evening, I would still give them these hour-long sales meetings on how to close rich people. And once a week, I'd give them one of these marathon sessions at night where I'd stand in front of the room and for 3 or 4 hours, I'd drill the hell out of them, right? But no matter what I did, no matter how much training they got, they just still couldn't seem to close rich people. They were young and uneducated, and they were basically getting battered around and abused by the rich people. I think they were actually getting hung up on more than they weren't. But anyway, it was really driving me crazy because I had this huge problem that, I could close these guys, and so could my junior partner, Danny, my one superstar salesman. He was a born closer like me. He struggled a bit in the beginning, but once he got over the hump, he was unstoppable. It was like both he and I, we just knew instinctively what to say to people and exactly when to say it and also how to say it. We were born closers, as the phrase goes. But what does it really mean when you say, he's a born closer or she's a born closer? Is it a God-given gift reserved for only the select lucky few? Or does everyone have the gift? Everyone has the potential to be a born closer. It's just a matter of figuring out how to wake up the potential inside you. Thankfully, it turns out to be the latter and not the former, or else I'd be out of a job. And I'll tell you why in a second. But first, let me explain to you exactly what it means to be a born closer. It means that without even realizing it yourself, your brain has somehow figured out a strategy that can move people from a state of being not so certain about something to a state of being absolutely certain about something. I'll repeat that again. Born closers use an unconscious strategy, meaning inside them, to move people from a state of being not so certain about something to a state of being absolutely certain about something. And that's why it makes total sense that I was able to break all those sales records back in the day. You see, despite the fact that I hadn't even invented the straight line yet, it didn't matter whether I was knocking on doors, selling penny stocks over the phone, or closing the richest 1% of Americans on buying millions of dollars of $6 stocks. I was still actually using a straight line strategy on them. I was just doing it unconsciously up here. I didn't realize it at the time, and the same thing went for Danny. Once I showed him a few things, his brain connected the rest of the dots, and he began using straight line tactics without even knowing it. The problem with that, though, is that if you're doing something really, really well without even thinking about it, it's nearly impossible to teach it to another person. That's why some of the greatest salespeople in the world are the worst sales trainers. They're expert closers themselves, but if you ask them, how do you do it? How do you close so many people? They'll just throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't know, I'm just a really good people person, or I'm just passionate about my product, or I'm really good at making people feel comfortable or getting into rapport, or one of the other 100 or so sales cliches. But the truth is they just don't really know. They're all running unconscious strategies, so they can't pass that knowledge, that system or skill set on to someone else. So the fact that Danny and I could go out and sell rich people didn't really help me that much. I mean, yeah, it was good that we made some sales, made some money, but my vision was to train thousands of people to sell to rich people. I wanted to duplicate myself, and the only way to do that was to take what I was doing so well unconsciously and turn it into what's called a conscious strategy. So anyway, going back to teaching my guys at Stratton, after a month of trying to teach them how to call rich people, they were still failing miserably. And again, it wasn't due to a lack of training. I was giving 2 meetings a day, plus Every other week, I'd give them one of these 4-hour marathon sessions at night where I'd stand in front of the room and I'd teach them how to close. And the lesson there is that when it comes to sales training, it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. And these were the days right before I hit on the straight line system, and I tried everything I could think of, but there was this missing ingredient, this X factor, and I just couldn't quite hit on it. Then one day, out of sheer frustration, I remember this day like it was yesterday, my guys had asked me to do one of these emergency night training sessions, right, which is basically the marathon at night. They were all getting really negative from not being able to close rich people, which is still, by the way, one of the biggest issues I deal with today when I go into a sales force doing consulting. I walk into a company that have an amazingly bright future, great product, great everything, right, perfect industry, perfect timing, and yet the sales force is still negative because they just don't have the tools, they don't actually close the people. And to those people, just so you know, the straight line's like manna from heaven. It's like pouring water on a wilted flower. Anyway, my salesmen were bugging me like crazy at night, and I knew myself that I was about to end up back in the poorhouse, so to speak, if I couldn't teach my guys how to close rich people. So I was like, all right, fine, guys, I'll do it, and, let's go home, we'll change, we'll get the street closed first. We came back to work at about 7 p.m., we were gonna work till 11, and I stood in front of the room and I started doing my usual training, which had to do mostly with teaching them how to sound good, the right tonalities and such, and also answering objections, which they've been getting a ton of from the rich people since they started calling them, right? So I was doing my typical role-playing back and forth and saying, all right, guys, if someone says, I want to think about it, then what do you say? And one of the guys would spit back some canned response like, well, Mr. Jones, I understand you want to think about it, but time is a critical factor here, and blah, 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 blah. One of those sales cliches. And I'm like, no, that's wrong. Your tonality's off. You're going to break rapport with them. And then I would demonstrate the exact right response, how to say it, and then move on to the next guy with a different objection. And on it went. And I could see from their faces, they were so frustrated. They just simply were not getting it, and they just couldn't close. And finally, I was like, guys, you're making this so much harder than it actually is. It's not that complicated. To which a few of the guys started mumbling how it is so hard, and the rich people are all idiots and assholes, and, how we should go back to calling poor people who are kinder and gentler and happy to send what few bucks they have to us to a complete stranger on the mere phone call, right? As they kept on whining at me, something just clicked inside me, and that was it. Bam, that was the trigger. I mean, the thought of abandoning my billion-dollar idea and going back to calling poor people, it got me so angry inside that I popped into a state of such absolute certainty that I was nearly screaming at them. I was like, what are they all saying to you? It's making this so damn impossible to close them. Go ahead, tell me. They just looked at me with these kind of fearful expressions on their faces because I seemed like I was about to literally take a flying leap at them and start choking to death, right? But after a few seconds, one of them muttered, well, there are so many objections, they just keep throwing them at us. To which another guy chimed in, yeah, they just keep throwing these objections at us. Another one said, yeah, exactly, Jen, it's all these thousands of objections. We never know what to expect, what they're going to say. It's like we're just getting objections rained down on us, right? We're getting barraged. And I'm like, really? I'm like, it's utter contempt was dripping from my tone. Tell me, what are they? Go ahead, tell me what these thousands of objections are. Come on, tell me. And they began giving me all the common objections that all salesmen hear. I want to think about it. I want to call you back. I got to speak to my accountant, my lawyer. I got to talk to my wife. Bad time of year right now, tax time, Christmas time. I mean, on and on they went, listing all 1,000 of these objections, which at the end of the day turned out to be actually only 12. That's right, there were only 12 objections, and the rest of them were just all repeats or slight variations of those basic 12 objections. So I shook my head in absolute disgust, and I said, you guys are just too much. You're crying about all these objections. There were only 12 of them, and even those don't matter. I mean, don't you guys get it? Every sale is the same. And they're like, what? I'm like, every sale's the same. Watch, it's a goddamn straight line. And I grabbed my trusty marker, and I said, you have an open and you have a close. And I drew the straight line on the board. I said, this is your open and this is your close. And your goal as a salesperson is to keep them right on the straight line and pushing them all the way from the open to the close. Now, the next question is, well, why is every sale the same? See, when I said to them at night, they were like, well, what are you talking about? Every sale is not the same, Jordan. And in fact, you're probably thinking the same thing right now. You're saying to yourself, Jordan, you're totally wrong about that one. I see what you're saying here with the other stuff, but every sale's different. Everyone has different needs, different objections, different beliefs, different values, different pain points. And my answer to you is, yeah, that's all completely true, but it's not what I'm talking about. When I said every sale is the same, what I meant that night, and what turned out to be probably the most profound revelation I've ever had in my life, especially when it comes to sales, is that despite all those differences I just mentioned, people's needs, their objections, their values, their pain points, despite all that individual stuff, the same three key elements still have to line up in a prospect's mind before you have any shot of closing them. And it doesn't matter what you're selling them or how you're selling it to them or how much it costs or how much money they have, whether it's a tangible product or it's an intangible idea or a vision, whether it's over the phone you're selling or in person, doesn't matter. If in a single moment in time you can create these three crucial core elements in another person's mind, then bam, you have an excellent shot of closing them. And conversely, if even one of those three core elements is missing, you basically have no shot at all of closing them. Here's what they are. We call these three crucial elements the 3 tenths. And the context here is a scale of certainty in your prospect's mind that runs from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most certain someone could possibly be, and a 1 being the least certain someone could possibly be. So again, if a prospect is currently at a 10, then it means he's in a state of absolute certainty at that moment. And if he's currently at a 1, then he's in a state of absolute uncertainty at that moment. Now watch. If a 1 represents complete uncertainty and a 10 represents absolute certainty, then here in the very beginning of the sale, when a prospect first walks through your door and you haven't said even a word to them yet, he's typically going to have some amount of uncertainty about your product. These are his preconceived notions, and they're based on things like his gut reaction when he first laid eyes on your product. Perhaps he's done some research on the internet about your product. He's looked at other similar products. Maybe he's got some preconceived notions about you as the salesperson. And of course, it could be any one of those things, or it could be all of them working together. In the beginning, someone is typically very uncertain about things, so they want to think about them. And at the end of the sale, the goal is to make them absolutely certain about your product, so they want to buy it. Does that make sense? You see, someone is very uncertain about things in the beginning, so they want to think about them. That's only natural. Then we help them become absolutely certain that what we're offering is the best fit for them, so then they want to buy it. You see, people don't buy when they're uncertain. That's the way it should be. So what we're doing here, what's happening as you're moving someone down the straight line, you're moving them from a state of uncertainty to a state of absolute certainty. That's your goal. Now remember, there are actually 2 types of certainty. You have certainty on a logical level, which we call a logical certainty. Then we have certainty on an emotional level, which we call emotional certainty. And here's the deal. People do not buy on logic. They buy on emotion. Then they justify with logic. But when you satisfy the logic center of the brain first, it then opens them up to be moved emotionally. One without the other doesn't work very well. Now, what are these 3 tenths? Now, number 1, the first 10 is they must love your product. Your product. They must love your product. In other words, imagine, let's say I'm an insurance broker. I'm selling business or commercial insurance. Let's say I present you with some type of new coverage, and after I'm done, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, Jordan, it sounds like a pretty decent program. Now, if that's your tone of voice, your level of certainty, are you going to buy from me? Probably not, right? In other words, people don't buy when they're in that state. They buy when they're like, oh my God, yeah, no, it sounds great. That's amazing coverage. Ooh, really, really great. You get it? They buy when they love your product. And the same thing goes if it's the intangible. Let's say I share my vision for the future with you, and you're like, oh my God, Jordan, that sounds great. I'm so inspired. And if that's your level of certainty, then I have an excellent shot of closing you on my vision, meaning to get you involved to help you actually achieve my vision, which means buying into it with your time, your money, whatever else it takes. But if you were like, oh, yeah, you know, your vision sounds okay, Jordan, and your tone of voice was someone like who was about to fall asleep, am I going to close you then? No, probably not. So in essence, the first 10 is about the actual product you're selling. And in the beginning, what's typically happening is that they're simply not at a 10, meaning they're not absolutely certain that it's the best thing since sliced bread. Now, they might not be at a 1, which is the absolute uncertain state, as if it's the worst product in the whole entire world, right? They're usually somewhere in between it, maybe a 4 or a 5, which sounds like, yeah, it's okay, I don't know. It's like they're, 50-50 on your product. They're not going to be like, ugh, it's terrible. Typically like, yeah, it sounds okay. Okay, but they're not really sure whether it's superior to the competitions. They don't give you that, yeah, wow, it's just unbelievably great, right? So what your goal here is, as a salesperson using the straight line, is you want to move them down the line, and you're trying to raise them up from wherever they are to a 10 for product, to that level of absolute certainty about whatever it is you're offering them. Make sense? So I want you to understand here again that this is our goal, which is to get them to a 10, meaning they're absolutely certain your product or your service or your idea is just undamn believable. The cliche I always use, it's the best thing since sliced bread. They absolutely, positively love your product. They're like, damn, that stock's going up if you're a stockbroker. Or, man, that manager's got a hell of a great track record if you're a hedge fund manager. Woo, damn, I'm not buying that car from this guy if you're a car salesman, but woo, boy, what a beautiful car he's trying to sell me. What great insurance coverage that is. You understand what I'm getting at here? Woo, I'm not buying it now, but boy, what a great product it is. See, that's that level of absolute certainty that you want to get someone to about your product. And interestingly enough, I'll tell you that when I go into corporations where I've trained salesmen all over the world, at huge companies like Microsoft and Virgin and Goldman Sachs, to these little mom and pop service businesses around the whole world. And when I walk in there and listen to the salesman, I'm absolutely appalled 99% of the time. I mean, they're trying to close people who aren't even convinced that their product is great. They're trying to hype them into a close, not convincing them that the product itself is amazing. This is the first thing you got to do, both logically and then emotionally. Now, how we actually do that, I'll get to a bit later, but I want you to understand that this is your goal. As you move someone down the straight line, it's your first 10. You want to get them to a 10 logically, a 10 emotionally, and it's on your product. Make sense? Now, number 2, the next thing, now, it's not enough that they're just absolutely certain that your product is amazing. They also have to be certain that you yourself are amazing, meaning that you're a person they want to do business with. You. They trust and connect with you. That's your second 10. So in essence, you have to sell yourself. See, it's not enough they love your product. I mean, let's just say an insurance broker calls you up and he presents you with a new type of coverage that was really, really compelling. I mean, it really filled your needs and you kind of could see yourself benefiting from the product, right? But you thought the guy was kind of an idiot. Would you buy from him, yes or no? You'd say, okay, great, thanks for the info, pal. And then you go buy the insurance from someone else. Now, I'm sure you've all done this, right? I mean, I've done this myself where someone presented me with an idea. In fact, it was a car. When I was going to buy a Porsche Panamera, that new 4-door Porsche, and I went in there loving the car, but I was so turned off by the salesperson that I literally walked out without buying it. Nothing to do with the product, had to do strictly with the salesman. So what do? Typically, you end up going buy from someone else. And that's what we all do. We end up buying from someone else. So again, it's not enough that they're at a 10 about the product. They also have to be at a 10 about you on both a logical and an emotional level. Lastly, the third 10 is that they have to feel connected to your company. They have to essentially trust and connect with the company itself. In other words, let's say a stockbroker calls you up and he presents you with an unbelievable opportunity and he sounds great to himself, but you think his company might be a scam or illegitimate. You're not that sure. The question is, are you going to buy, yes or no? The answer is you won't, which is why so often we could be in a situation where our prospects saying, oh my God, yeah, I love your idea, it sounds great, oh, you're such a great guy too, and yet for some reason they won't buy. And then yet, if they were already a customer of yours and you had a relationship with them and you offered them basically the same opportunity, you would get a totally different response. They'd be like, oh my God, yeah, it sounds great, Jordan, do it. You see the difference? See, the reason why it's so much easier to make sales to existing customers than to new ones is because in the case of the former, you already have the second and third 10s established. That's also why it's easy to get bigger sales from existing customers as opposed to when you first opened up the account. It's not an accident. You simply do not have these 10s established with a new customer. So all you have to do with an existing customer, if you have a good relationship with them, is to get them to a 10 or even an 8 about your product so they're reasonably certain. But getting them to a 10, 10, 10, both logically and emotionally, this is what you're doing is you move them down the straight line. Make sense? Okay, good. So those are your first 3 elements. And when I said to my salespeople, every sale is the same, that's exactly what I was talking about. It doesn't matter what else is happening, these 3 things must line up in a single moment in time. In other words, you have to corral the 3 10s in a single moment in time and then ask for the order. If you have them at a 10, 10, 10, both logically and emotionally, and ask for the order, then boom, you got a pretty good shot at closing them. And that's why every sale is the same. And the same thing needs to happen in any sale. And it doesn't matter what you're selling, if it's an idea, a vision, they don't only have to love the vision, they also have to trust and connect with you as the visionary and also the organization behind you that's going to help you turn your vision into a reality. The same things have to line up no matter what the situation is. And lastly, the third 10 is that they have to feel connected to your company. They have to essentially trust and connect with the company itself. In other words, let's say a stockbroker calls you up and he presents you with an unbelievable opportunity and he sounds great to himself, but you think his company might be a scam or illegitimate. You're not that sure. The question is, are you going to buy, yes or no? The answer is you won't, which is why so often we could be in a situation where our prospect saying, oh my God, yeah, I love your idea, it sounds great, oh, you're such a great guy too, and yet for some reason they won't buy. And then yet, if they were already a customer of yours and you had a relationship with them and you offered them basically the same opportunity, you would get a totally different response. They'd be like, oh my God, yeah, it sounds great, Jordan, do it. You see the difference? See, the reason why it's so much easier to make sales to existing customers than to new ones is because in the case of the former, you already have the second and third 10s established. That's also why it's easy to get bigger sales from existing customers as opposed to when you first opened up the account. It's not an accident. You simply do not have these 10s established with a new customer. So all you have to do with an existing customer, if you have a good relationship with them, is to get them to a 10 or even an 8 about your product so they're reasonably certain. But getting them to a 10, 10, 10, both logically and emotionally, this is what you're doing is you move them down the straight line. Make sense? Okay, good. So those are your first 3 elements. And when I said to my salespeople, every sale is the same, that's exactly what I was talking about. It doesn't matter what else is happening, these 3 things must line up in a single moment in time. In other words, you have to corral the 3 10s in a single moment in time and then ask for the order. If you have them at a 10, 10, 10, both logically and emotionally, and ask for the order, then boom, you got a pretty good shot at closing them. And that's why every sale is the same. And the same thing needs to happen in any sale. And it doesn't matter what you're selling, if it's an idea, a vision, they don't only have to love the vision, they also have to trust and connect with you as the visionary and also the organization behind you that's going to help you turn your vision into a reality. The same things have to line up no matter what the situation is. Now, what happens sometimes, in fact, very often, is that we actually have the 3 10s lined up at a pretty high level. And by the way you know they're lined up is by using your ears and listening for cues. And I'm going to show you how to do that really at a high level when we get to the triggers and both the unconscious and conscious ways in which you can actually tell if you have your person at a high level of certainty. But as I was saying, very often you have someone that's feeling really certain about all 3 10s, and they still don't buy from you. You know, like they're like, oh my God, Jordan, I love the stock, and wow, you're a great broker, and your company, yeah, it sounds great too, but just not buying. You ever been in that situation where you had someone really, really close that just wouldn't take the plunge? Well, there's a reason for that. You see, there's something else at work, another force. And it's your fourth element of the straight line. It's called the action threshold. And what the action threshold is, it's the level of certainty that a prospect has to be at before he or she will buy. Let me repeat that. It's the level of certainty that a prospect has to be at before he or she will buy. Let me give you an example here. Now me, I am what you called a born buyer. I buy everything. I mean, you could sell me a bridge, for crying out loud, if you really wanted to. I just love to buy stuff, even if it's crap. So of course I have a house full of crap I never use. I see something, I buy it. Boom, no big deal. Even if I never use it, doesn't matter. I just still buy stuff and I feel good about it. In fact, not that long ago, I'll tell you a story here. I was walking through Perth, Western Australia in the airport, and as I approached the gate, I heard out of the corner this sound, and I look and I see this young Asian kid, and he's got this golf club in his hand. He's got on some stand, some promotional stand of some sort, right? And out of the corner of my eye, I watch him take another golf swing. And it was a nice golf swing, you know, and he hit the ball, and from where I was looking at the damn ball, I was looking to see if it was flying over at the gate, right? And then I looked at the end of the club, and sure enough, the ball was stuck to the end of the club. Turns out it was actually a training system this guy had, right? And some company at a Prague where they put Velcro on the face of the golf club. Then they had Velcro that was covering like the soft golf ball, and when you swung, okay, what happened was the ball would stick on the end of the club, and based on where it stuck, you can tell if you were gonna hook or slice the golf ball. So if you're hitting the ball on the inside, you were gonna hook the ball, and if you were hitting it on the outside, you then slice the ball. So I watched this thing, and sucker that I am, I walk over and say, hey, that looks pretty cool. And I'm watching this guy and say, what is this thing? How does it work? And the kid says, oh, it's, really simple, watch. And he lines up his ball, and he, takes his stance, and he hits this beautiful whoosh, golf swing, and sure enough, he shows me the end, and he goes, look, I hit this here right on the inside of the ball here, and sure enough, because of that, I hit what's gonna be a nice, solid draw. Then he tells me, you can also see if you're hitting the ball too close to the heel or too close to the toe, so you're not getting a solid shot. So I thought about that for a second, and I was like, well, how much does that cost? And he goes, oh, it's only $49. I'm like, really? I'll take it. And I bought it just right there on the spot, and just so you know, I knew the thing was basically a piece of garbage. I'm like, there's no way this thing is actually gonna really work. I'll probably use it once and then never use it again because it's a stupid thing, but I bought it anyway. I'm not a stupid guy, just so you know. I actually, and listen, this is important here, I actually ran a buying strategy through my mind. It was a conscious decision I made, and it happened just like that. You see, the way we actually make decisions, all of us, is we run these parallel movies through our mind. Before we buy, you'll project down the road in an instant, and you'll say to yourself, if I buy this, am I gonna feel more pain or more pleasure? And likewise, if I don't buy it, will I feel more pain or more pleasure? In essence, your brain is running these movies, and it's happening so fast that you don't even realize it. But I actually sized the whole thing up in my mind. I was like, how much does it cost? And he repeated his number, $49. And I asked myself this magic question that every person asks themselves before they make any buying decision. And the question is this: what's the worst that can possibly happen? What's the worst that can possibly happen? Every human being, before they make any decision, they always look at the downside before they buy. They say, what's the worst that can possibly happen? Let's say this kid was a total scam artist. The thing was a total piece of crap and, entirely useless. What's the worst that's gonna happen? Is that gonna put me in the poorhouse, $49? No. Am I gonna feel like an idiot about it? Well, not really, because it's only $49, so what the hell? But if it works the way he says, on the other hand, let's talk about the upside here. Well, damn, I've been having problems with my golf swing shanking the ball for as long as I can remember. And I'd be able to get rid of that shank once and for all, be able to hit that beautiful drive like this young Asian kid, and I'll feel so good when I'm sitting in the clubhouse with my buddies after a long round of golf, having a beer, talking about my new improved golf swing. You see what's happening here? I'm projecting, I'm playing the movie out here for you in the future. It's what we call future pacing a decision. I actually future pace my decision, and based on the outcomes I get, I'll either buy or not buy. See, if my movie tells me that I'm gonna have a lot of pleasure if I buy, and not that much pain, then I'll buy. And if it's the other way around, then guess what? I won't buy. So when I asked the guy, how much does it cost? And he said $49. I said to myself, what's the worst that could possibly happen here? Is it gonna destroy me financially? Is it gonna put me in the poorhouse? Okay, now logically, let's go to that's emotion. Now, logically, I said to myself, all right, it's not that expensive. So, and it does sort of make logical sense, this device, meaning on the physics side, I kind of ran the physics through my mind. Well, it wasn't that stupid, right? So since I was able to justify it logically, I was then freer to be moved emotionally, which was actually seeing myself on the course with the beautiful swing and feeling good sitting in the clubhouse and imagining I'm on the 15th hole of Pebble Beach and not hitting it into the water the way I did last time. That's a true story, by the way. Seriously, I played Pebble Beach and it was one of the worst, most awful rounds of my life. And in consequence, I felt ultimate pain from that. So when I bought this crappy product on pure emotion, I imagined seeing myself on the 15th tee of Pebble Beach and feeling great. Okay, and that's me. See, I have what's called a low action threshold. And because of that, you can basically sell me anything whether I need it or not, as long as I don't think the thing will kill me. Now let me give you the polar opposite of myself, someone with an ultra high action threshold. My father, whose name is Max, and if you read the book, his name is Mad Max. Well, my dad, he is literally the toughest buyer on the planet. He doesn't buy anything unless he's absolutely certain and damn sure of it. He's not buying any miracle golf cures. He's not walking through any airports and buying anything. He'd be like, that bastard, who is that guy with his golf equipment, his golf swing? What is that all about? What does that bastard think he is? He was always calling everyone bastards, my dad, even people he never met before. The bastards of the IRS, the bastards of the Ford Motor Company who put a rattle in his car. Let's just say he was not an open guy when it came to getting sold stuff. Some people are just like that. They're just tough sells, and it's called having a high action threshold. Now watch the graph here. Here's how this plays out. People with high action thresholds, now right here, this is a 1 to 10 in the scale of certainty. Now someone with a high action threshold, they gotta go all the way here, boom. They gotta be at a 10, 10, 10 and damn sure of it before they buy anything. You get it? You have to make them absolutely positively certain if you wanna close them on anything. And that means number one, they have to be sure as hell if the product is going to be great and that it satisfies both their logical and their emotional needs, all of them. Two, they got to be sure you're an honest salesperson, ethical, and you're not going to be, ripping them off in any way whatsoever. And three, that your company itself is going to stand behind the product for the future. They've got to be at a 10, 10, 10 and damn sure of it. If they're at an 8, 8, 8, which is kind of like right over here on the graph, will they buy? Yes or no? The answer is no. They will not buy at an 8, 10, 8, an 8, 9, 8. They'll only buy when you get into a 10, 10, 10, which is very often, you're in that situation where you're like, geez, I don't get it. They seem like they really love my product, and they kind of liked me too, yet they just still said they wanted to think about it. The reason is because they had a very high action threshold. So what we do with the straight line is we actually lower their action threshold temporarily at just the right moment. See, you can't lower someone's action threshold forever. It's only for the moment, and it's only for a fleeting moment at that, maybe 5 or 10 minutes at most. So you have to know exactly when to do it, which is only after you've already established those 3 tenths at a very, very high level. Then you lower the action threshold, which is your fourth key element to the straight line. Now, let me explain exactly what a person's action threshold is, what it's made up of. What it is basically, it's the sum of all their values and beliefs about buying and making decisions and how they perceive the world, essentially. Some people have a belief that, the only good decision I make is one that takes me 3 weeks to make. I want to make my decisions slowly. And other people say, I go with my gut. I see it, I like it, boom, I buy it. Now, what you're looking to do as a salesperson is you're looking to actually get someone's level of certainty above their action threshold. And again, if you're having problems doing that, which sometimes happens, then you actually go the other way. You get certainty as much as possible, and then you lower the action threshold afterwards so it drops below certainty, and then boom, people start to buy. Now, my family, let me just tell you about some beliefs that I grew up with. We had this guy, he was called the filler brush man. And I don't know if you have them, wherever you live, but this is a door-to-door hairbrush salesman. And when he would knock on my door, ring the buzzer, my father would be like, who is it? And he'd say, it's the Philip Rush man. My father would be like, Jesus H. Christ, who got that Philip? And he wanted to have the guy thrown in jail, call the police, right? My parents hated salespeople. They hated them. How proud they are of me right now, right? But anyway, we had the Kirby vacuum guy, right? My father, get him out of my house, right? I was told as a kid, and maybe you were told this too, don't trust the salesman. Don't take candy from strangers. Don't trust anyone. They're all out to get you. The whole world's out to get you. I grew up like that, being spoon-fed those beliefs from both my mom and my dad, and guess what? I rejected them. See, typically what we do is either one of two things. Either we'll model our parents exactly, or we'll go the exact other way. Well, in my case, obviously, I went the exact opposite way. Typically, it's not the middle ground. So I rejected all that stuff, and now I'm essentially your dream client. You don't have to get me to a 10-10-10. You get me to a 7-6-7, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a whirl. What the hell, right? Because the belief I have says smart decisions are made quickly, not painfully slowly. And I'm willing to trust someone that, okay, I'm not that suspicious of people. I'll go with my gut, and bam, salesman want to make a commission. Nothing wrong with that. I'm smart enough myself to make an informed decision. No one's going to take advantage of me. That's just my beliefs. Not right or wrong, they're my beliefs. And what happens is that people who have a high action threshold are loaded with the opposite beliefs, these limiting beliefs about buying. So what we learn to do here is we lower their action threshold during the sale. Now, one way to do that, a very simple way, is by offering them a guarantee. You guarantee your product, your good, or your service. A second way is by offering them a cooling off period where they can actually make the decision now, but they can still reverse it for 3 or 4 days, right? That's another second way. But the most powerful way, and I'm going to talk about this in much greater detail in the looping module, the more powerful way is we actually make them run the movie again. Except this time we make sure it's a different movie. So we give them reasons why they'll feel massive amounts of pleasure and very little pain if they make the decision. And if they don't make the decision, why they'll feel no pleasure at all and massive amounts of pain. Essentially, we actually lay out that scenario I just mentioned. What's the worst that can possibly happen? We make them run the movie logically, except on our terms. An example would be this. I'd say to the client who's sitting on the fence, let's say I'm wrong. Let's say the stock I try to sell you is going south, and it goes down 2 points. We got a stop loss in place, and you lose $4,000. Is that going to put you in the poorhouse? Is that going to make you a poor man? And they'll say, well, no, of course not. You say, exactly. And on the upside, let's say I'm right, and the stock goes up 10 points, and you make, $5, $10, $15,000. It's not going to make you the richest man on earth, but it will do is serve as a benchmark for future business. Show you that I'm a guy that can not only put you into the market at the right time, but also take you out. And what I could do for you over the long term in the way of new issues, aftermarket, warrant conversions, I could be an asset to you and your family and blah, blah. I don't want to go through the whole things. I do this in the looping module. But here's the point. When you run that scenario, that action threshold lowering scenario, and you make them run a different movie, if you had them close, if they were actually 8, 9, 9, and in that moment you drop down their action threshold by making them run that better movie, bam, magic starts to happen. You get these really, really tough non-buyers who could use your product, who actually need your product. You turn them into buyers in the moment, and then once you have those people, they become the best clients of all. People who have high action thresholds, they are great long-term clients. They don't mind paying top dollar. They're great tippers. They're so happy they finally found someone they can trust and connect with, a company that will stand behind them, a product they can enjoy and trust. Once you have that person, my dad, just so you know, he's been dealing with the same dry cleaner, the same Chinese laundry, the same mechanic, the same everything for the last 45 years. Someone, in whatever it was able to lower his action threshold in that moment, got him as a client, and he never, ever left. And that truly is the beauty of the straight line. Remember what I said at the beginning about closing everyone who's closable? This is what I was talking about. You see, these are the clients, these high action threshold people, the ones that typically slip away from most salespeople. Once you understand the dynamics, the power of the straight line, these people become literally laydowns to you. And you get to that point where I'm at and where all the people I've trained are at, which is closing anyone who's closable. what the straight line represents is basically this. Number one, you have the product. That's your first 10. 2, there's you. You're the second 10. 3 is your company, which is your third 10. 4th is your action threshold, right? Lowering a person's action threshold. And then lastly, you have that 5th core element, that key of the straight line, and it's called the pain threshold. And pain is essentially the invisible force that makes people take action. See, if someone's in massive pain, they'll take action, even if they're not that certain. In fact, people will do almost anything if they're feeling extreme pain in the moment to get out of that pain. They'll take any action to get from pain into pleasure. Yeah, let me give you a perfect example here. This is a great story. I hate going to the dentist, and I had this problem with a tooth for years and years. First, I had a cavity that turned into a root canal, then another root canal. They just couldn't fix this damn tooth, right? And finally, the guy says, there are 2 different ways we can do that. First is a bridge. They put a bridge in your mouth, and the second way would be an implant. He goes, an implant's going to cost you a lot of money, like $4,000 or $5,000, but it'll last you for a lifetime. It'll be perfect and blah, 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 blah. So I said, all right, me, the low action threshold, how long is it going to take me? How much? He's like, well, it'll take 4 months. And, between all the surgeries, it's got to heal. I mean, the screw they put in's got to set in bone and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, 4 months? Now, what a disaster is for a guy like me. I want instant gratification, right? So I imagine myself, now watch, I run the movie, and I imagine myself going back and forth to the dentist and back and forth, and just imagining all the stuff I'm going to have to go through to actually get this done. And that's, by the way, a very powerful equation that I ran through my head. I want to tell you what it is, okay? It's called the energy in, benefits out equation. See, when it comes to taking action, we tend to do things. We tend to take actions that we believe are going to require very little energy up front and over the long term, but that have a very large payoff in terms of benefits. In other words, if you have to jump through 18 different hoops, give your left testicle, your firstborn, the whole 9 yards, then maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get a couple of measly benefits. Well, you're not going to be taking that sort of action so quickly if that's the deal, right? But on the other hand, if it's so simple to do, as in we do everything for you, it's just a question of some very basic information to get the account open, and then we do basically everything else for you. And then what you're going to be going to get here starting first thing tomorrow, and you start listing benefit A, benefit B, benefit C. If you do that, where you make it no big deal to get started, and you stack benefit after benefit after benefit, and then calmly and reasonably and out with even 1 ounce of pressure, you say, believe me, sir, you're going to be very, very impressed. Sound fair enough? Bam. If you do that, you're very prone to someone saying, yeah, boom, let's open up the account. Because it was very easy on the way in and lots of benefits attached to it, right? Conversely, if it's the other way around, we have to expend massive sums of energy, we tend not to take action unless there's even more massive benefits on the other side. Energy in, benefits out. I'll be saying this to you over and over again in this training, especially when we get to the looping module. But let's get back to this dentist for a second here. He's obviously not a very good salesperson because he's asking me essentially to spend all this energy for some, sounds like okay benefits, a lifetime teeth. I don't know, the bridge sounded okay too. So I'm like, nah, just give me the bridge. So he says, fine, great, and he goes through the whole thing of measuring my teeth up, making me bite down this way and turn my head that way and slide my jaw this way and that way, all sorts of energy expending, right? And then the bastard, like my father, right? When we get to the end, to my own shock and dismay, he says, oops, sorry, the bridge won't work. He goes, we're going to have to go with the implant instead. So I'm like, oh my God. So at this point, what am I going to do? I say, fine, just get on with it, go with the implant and give me the gas. I'm 15 years old, I figure get some free gas from the dentist. So he turns up the gas on me and starts doing this damn implant. It's like a 4-month process I have to go through, and he drills, and it's got to set, and it's got to heal. And while it's in there healing, he's giving me these temporary crowns made of porcelain to fill the space, right? And this damn temporary keeps cracking and recracking because where it's situated in my mouth. And, I'm going crazy. I keep running back to the dentist, and every little meal I eat, and this little screw is sticking out. It's just a total pain in the butt, right? And finally, I get to this point where I'm just like so pissed off at the guy, and I go back and I say, listen, I say, can't you just make me a crown that is going to last, that won't crack? I don't care what this thing costs. And I'm sitting there really telling this guy that if you don't find me the right crown, I'm gone. And he says, yeah, actually I can give you this crown, but I have to get it made at a certain lab. And I said, great, how much? He says, $500. And I figure, well, you know, I don't really even care because my decision-making strategy is, boom, I'm in pain, I can't take this. The 310s are basically already established here, right? My tooth sucks as it is. So it seemed like a no-brainer in this case, and I have a low action threshold to start, right? So bam, with my pain factor raised up that high, I'm like, yeah, it was a no-brainer, just do it. And then also on the energy side of the equation, remember, we have money, which is nothing more than stored energy from our past hard work. So after I ran all those decision-making strategies and future pacing strategies, all the possible outcomes, all together, and by that took me no more than 3 or 4 seconds, which is pretty typical for a human being with an action threshold like mine, right? For a decision of that magnitude of importance, 3 or 4 seconds. So I said to the guy, I don't ever want to come back here again, so just get me the industrial strength titanium model that's impossible to break. So the guy goes out and he gets this tooth made, right? And it's an unbelievable tooth, and he puts it in, fits like a glove. He puts it in there, smack, and that's that. So now I have this screw in my mouth, and you know, from the implant with this temporary crown made of titanium that's covering it, but it's made beautifully and built to last, right? I have to go back now, though, and get the real implant, which is $900 more for the actual tooth, right? Which they get a screw in there, and that screw there, right? Now, let me ask you a question. You think I ever went back to put the permanent tooth in? No, I still have the temporary in there right now to this very day. You know why? No pain. Zero. Not an ounce of discomfort. No uncomfortability at all. So from my perspective, why would I want to go to the dentist? He wants to pull this thing out, right? And while the old one is still working fine, that's what I think at least. So from my point of view, I'm not going back. So now years and years, and here's where the story gets funny, years and years goes by, and this thing is really built to last. But finally, my partner, my girlfriend, she says to me, you know, she actually recommends, which in her case is giving me an order, right? So she orders me, you know, it's time, no, you got to get this thing taken out. And she's, you know, boom, all aspects of my health, you got to become healthy, Jordan. She makes me an appointment with the dentist, okay? And she goes, you got to get that tooth taken care of now. So I'm like, all right, fine, fine. And she actually finds a local dentist for me in the area where we live, okay, and she makes the appointment. Now, I need a cleaning anyway, so I figure, what the hell, and I give in, you know, kill 2 birds at once. So, and I walk into this local dentist's office, pretty nice, very upscale, and I sit down in the chair, and he says, okay, let me look at your mouth. That's doing his dentist thing, all right? Gives me the full exam, he takes some x-rays, and he looks them on the screen, and then a few minutes later he goes, oh, okay, I see, here's your deal. Yes, I see the whole thing in there, that screw from your implant. He goes, do you know what brand of screw it is? I'm like, what screw? What are you talking about? He goes, well, it'll be helpful if you could find out what brand of screw it is. And I'm like, screw you. I mean, what do I know about brand of screw, right? He goes, well, maybe we could do it ourselves here, but it'd be helpful if you could just maybe call the old dentist and find out about the screw. Well, hello. I guess he didn't do any straight line training because that's an awful lot of energy for me to expend, right? I got to actually do something here. I mean, a research project on a screw and for the dentist. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll let you know if I come across anything. And he says, okay, great, you know, let me give you a quote. Now, obviously, I was never going to do any research at all, right? But he comes back with his quote here, and he goes, here you go, Jordan. And he hands me a slip of paper, and on it is the cost, $2,900 to get the new tooth put in. And then he says to me, and he goes, oh, by the way, Jordan, do you know what kind of glue they use to get that temporary in? You know, it's really good in there. It's like, it's a very fine temporary with great glue. And you know, if it's the wrong type of glue, we're going to have to really hack that thing out of there if it's permanent. And I hate to have to wrench that thing out. And I'm like, good Lord. I mean, I'm sitting in this chair here imagining what that's going to feel like. He's actually future pacing my own pain right in front of me. I'm thinking, maybe I'll get lucky and they'll just, you know, put some solvent in there maybe and dissolve the glue. I don't even know at this point, right? And then Dr. Death plows on and goes, all right, so it's $2,900. We can do this for you in 2 sittings, then maybe a third one just to readjust this tooth. What do you think? And guess what I said? I said, let me think about it. To which he replies, okay, great. Let me know when you've decided and I'll schedule you in. And that was that, and I walked out. And I go home and I'm going to think about it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm never going to go back to this guy ever again. You know why? Listen, I still have this temporary in there right now. It's not the money. I have enough money in the bank to get lots of stored energy in my bank. I can get as many teeth as I want. But why on earth would I want to expend all that energy on doing that? With him especially. For starters, he did the absolute worst thing that a salesperson or an influencer could ever do. He said to me, it's going to hurt you when I pull this thing out right now. He basically made me in short-term pain right now. If I made a decision, he's going to put me in short-term pain. And when I'm future-pacing this whole idea myself, I'm saying to myself, you know, what's the worst that could possibly happen if I leave this thing in? My movie says, Nothing really. It all seems okay. It's a great temporary titanium. You know, my gut says, yeah, it'll stay in there forever. So screw it. I'll wait until what? I'll wait until it hurts. Then I'll go back and get it taken care of. That's what I'm going to do. Now, let's rerun this scenario a different way. What if this guy would have understood even the simplest aspects of the straight line system? What if he would have said to me, listen, Jordan, I understand the temporary seems to be working well right now, but let me just tell you a few of the problems that you're going to run into over the long term if you don't take this thing out. And by the way, I'm sure there are 3 or 4 things he could have said to me that were perfectly ethical, perfectly legitimate, because there are, in fact, reasons why I should have got this thing taken out. I mean, it's a temporary, it's not a permanent. He could have said, you know, Jordan, you travel all over the world, you know, just imagine yourself being in Zambia or Zimbabwe, and all of a sudden the tooth finally cracks, gives way. What are you going to do then, Jordan? You know, you can have some witch doctor put a new tooth in. Just imagine the discomfort then. I mean, all this guy had to do was future pace me this much. Say, you know, listen, Jordan, this thing could really blow up into a big problem for you. I've seen this happen many times before, and it's really a painful experience. Let's just get this thing done now. Believe me, you'll be glad you did. Make sense? I'd be like, yeah, great. Here's my credit card. I was right on the spot without hesitation. But instead, I walked out with his business card and a $2,800 estimate from someone I would never, ever call again. But now let me give you a bit of a different scenario. Let's just say that I got home and 2 weeks later, I bite into something and bam, I get this terrible pain. Wow, my tooth cracks and I'm in mortal pain. You think I'll be running back to the dentist and getting it done right away? Yeah, of course I would. See, if I feel pain, I act. If I don't feel pain, I'll only act if you present me something that fits just the right way. And that, my friend, is called your pain threshold, which is your 5th and final element of the straight line, namely, how much pain you're currently feeling right now, and will this product help me resolve it? Will it alleviate my pain? Essentially raise someone's pain threshold right in the middle of a conversation by future pacing them, or even more elegantly, by just leading them a bit and getting them to actually talk about their own tale of woe. See, people love to tell you their tale of woe. So to amplify someone's pain, all you have to do is wait for a potential sore spot to come up while you're doing your intelligence gathering, and then ask them to expand on it. Just say in a very compassionate tone, really, tell me more about that. And there your own spoken words are, you know, I'd really like to know because I care. That's my tonality there. I'd really like to know, I care. Then just sit back and listen and nod your head with the right body language and listen as they pour their heart out to you. And they themselves will actually amplify their pain for you. That's the secret. People love to amplify their own pain. They love to amplify their words. It's basically how human beings are built. We just pick at our own scabs. We have a tendency also to view our problems as being much bigger than they actually are. Now, let's talk syntax for a second. There are 2 primary places where we look to dig out and, if necessary, amplify a person's pain. First, we do it right in the beginning while we're gathering intelligence, and the reason we do it there is because you want your prospect measuring your offer against his feeling of pain, a pain which hopefully your product will then alleviate at some point, as opposed to him being in a complete state of denial of his pain, thinking that he's feeling just fine and dandy, and then measuring your offer against that feeling of, you know, feeling kind of complacent and feeling just fine. In other words, there's actually an inverse relationship between your pain threshold and your action threshold. Watch for a second here. Notice the 2 lines and what happens as the level of pain increases, the action threshold begins to drop in near perfect lockstep. And when someone's in massive pain, the action threshold literally drops right down through the floor. Let's use my father again, for example. Now, under normal circumstances, he's one of the least trusting people in the entire world, right? And especially when it comes to his car. In fact, he actually thought his car was alive when I was growing up. He used to call it she. She's got a rattle, she's low on gas, she needs a good wash, my girl. Yeah, my father's a little bit nutty. He used to clean and buff his car as if our family's lives depended on it. I mean, literally 5 years later, his car still looked completely brand new and still smelled brand new as well. He loved his car, right? He wouldn't let anybody touch his car except some guy named Joe, who was the head mechanic at the local Sunoco station, right? Because like I said before, once a person with a high action threshold finds someone they like and trust, they'll never, ever leave them. Yet despite how much he loved his car and how much he loved and trusted Joe, I distinctly remember one time being in northern New Jersey, about 75 miles from home, and my father's water pump in the car had broke and she started to overheat. And guess what my dad did? You got it, went to the first gas station, there, boom, gets the girl fixed. Why? Pain. He was in pain, he had a problem, so he acted on his pain right there. His action threshold dropped through the floor, and boom, you raise the pain threshold, it lowers the action threshold, and like my father did, he made a decision. And so this is why we introduce pain in two spots. First in the beginning, as they're measuring our offer, we want to make sure they're measuring it against pain, and then again in the end, when they're on the fence, and we can't quite get them to cross over, right? We can't get their level of certainty above the action threshold, so we add on the pain, it lowers the action threshold, and bam, the magic starts to happen. Now, in essence, here's what all of this chunks up to. As I said earlier, the straight line, more than anything, it's the perfect syntax for creating certainty in your prospect, in your client. And syntax, again, is that fancy word for order. So essentially, the straight line represents the order in which you create certainty during a sale. It shows you what to do first, what to do second, what to do third, what to do fourth, and when to corral each of those three tens together, when to lower the action threshold, when to add on some pain if necessary. Essentially, it serves as your blueprint for every single sale, regardless of the prospect's action threshold, regardless of their pain threshold, their initial level of certainty, any of the three tens, it doesn't matter. It shows you at exactly what point in the linguistic encounter you're supposed to line up each of the 5 elements. In other words, you're not going to start off trying to lower someone's action threshold, and you're not going to start off telling them how great you are as an influencer, right? Which is the second 10, until you first had them certain about the greatness of your product, which is the first 10. And you're not going to wait until the very end to raise their pain threshold. Understand? You would do that in the beginning as well, so they're considering your offer in the right way with the right mindset. Again, the straight line is your A, B, C. It's what you're going to be doing first, second, third, and fourth. Now, let me just switch hats for a second here and give you a little bit of a different strategy, a way of viewing the straight line. It's something I call the scales. Okay, now let's pretend for a second that you're an insurance salesman, insurance broker, and you're trying to sell your prospect a new insurance product. Now, in the beginning of the sale, on one side of the scale, before you open up your mouth and try to create even the slightest bit of certainty in your prospect, they come into the sale having logical reasons why they should buy now, which is usually why they're there in the first place, looking to find out more about your product. And likewise, they also come into the encounter having emotional reasons why they should buy now. Logical reasons to buy now, emotional reasons to buy now. Then on the other side of the scale, they have logical reasons not to buy now and emotional reasons not to buy now. Essentially, these are all your negatives and these are all your positives. Make sense? Okay, great. Now, very often when an untrained salesman is trying to close someone, one of the huge mistakes they make is that they tend to create lots of logical reasons to buy and also a lot of emotional reasons to buy, but there's no reason to do it now, N-O-W. You see, it's not enough to simply have reasons to buy. It's got to be to buy now, because in the absence of some pain, the average person will simply wait to make a decision. Remember the equation, energy in, benefits out. Now, one way we do that is by answering objections, which are basically reasons not to buy now, both logical and emotional, but that's not exactly the best way to do it, in fact. The more elegant way to answer objections is to handle them before they ever come up. You answer objections before they come up. And by the way, since we know there are only so many objections for any one thing, we can embed them in our language patterns from the very beginning and keep doing it as we make our presentation. See, what we're actually doing here, just so you know, is you move someone down the straight line, you're piling on the positives, right? You're piling on the positives, you're piling on the positives, you're piling on the positives, both logical and emotional, to buy now, to buy now, to buy now, and at the same time, you're knocking out the negatives and knocking out the negatives and knocking out the negatives. That's what you're doing. So I want you to visualize this. Visualize it as a scale like this, see, on one of those old-fashioned type of scales with the fulcrum right here in the center, in the middle, right? In the beginning, it's balanced, with all the negatives on one side, the reasons not to buy now, not to do it, and here on the positives, all the positive reasons why you should do it now, why you should buy something, right? And they're balanced. So will the person buy? The answer is actually yes. They might buy if they have a very, very low action threshold. But typically, they won't buy because there's got to be at least maybe one more extra positive, and that makes it enough, and then bam, someone with a low action threshold will say, screw it, I'll just buy. And that's me, right? But what happens is that people with higher action thresholds, there has to be a more dramatic difference between the positives and the negatives. Essentially, they have to be absolutely certain, no seeds of doubt left. So it's like this scale with these sort of overwhelming positives on one side of the scale, right? And there's almost really no negative left on the other side of the scale, and boom, when you move them down the straight line and you're running those loops, which you're going to be doing in another module, you'll start knocking out negatives, adding on positives, lower the action threshold, and bam, that's when people start to buy. So in other words, what you would not do is you would not call someone up right away and say, hey, buddy, listen, I got this great product, let's do it. They'll say, well, no, let me think about it. They'll say, send me some information. You don't just ask for the order right away. You start off by building up some of your positives and knocking out some negatives. And as you do that, you start making progress. The scale slowly starts to tip. Are they saying yes? No, not yet, unless they have a very low action threshold. So let's take somebody who has a reasonably high action threshold. So you're not seeing progress yet in terms of them saying, yes, I'll do it, but you're still making massive progress. So as you take someone down the straight line, you're going from here to here. So you're saying to yourself, you know, damn, they're not buying, but you still know that you're making progress. It's just below the surface. And we can tell when we start to make progress in a couple of different ways. And one is a change in tonality. See, after I give them my opening presentation, I'll always ask for the order just to gauge their level of certainty. And when they want to think about it, I'll say, well, you know, let me ask you a question. Does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? And they'll typically say, you know, yeah, it sounds pretty good. Now you want to be at a 10, which sounds like, yeah, it's great, a great idea, I love the idea. So I know I have some work to do here. I have to actually raise their level of certainty about my idea, about the product itself. I have to move them to a higher state of certainty. So let's say I give them another language pattern, a very powerful bullet as to why my product truly is the best thing since sliced bread. And I get them excited, and at the end, when I ask them that question, and you see what I'm saying, do you like the idea? And they say, oh yeah, no, Jordan, I love the idea, it's great. Where are they now? Now they're like at a 9 or a 10. They're very high on the certainty scale. But do they buy now? Probably not, but I made a lot of progress. I've started to tip the scales in my favor. I made progress before they actually say yes. The biggest mistake that rookie salespeople make is they do not understand the word no or let me think about it. You know, oh, he said he wants to think about it? Forget it, the sale's over. When a prospect says no or let me think about it, let me call you back, that's when the sale begins. Any monkey can read through a sales script. It's what happens after the prospect says, let me think about it. That's when true influence begins. And you'll know you're making progress, that your prospect is starting to get more certain about things when they start to give you what we call BS. And that's not bullshit, it's buy signals. You run through a very powerful loop and ask for the order, and they'll say, how much does it cost? Which is very different than let me think about it. Ah, that's a buy signal. Or they'll say, what was the thing you said about that feature and what benefit would that give me? Boom, another buy signal. What that represents here on the scales is that you've knocked out some negatives now, you've built up some more positives, so the scale is starting to move. Do they buy yet? Not necessarily. So you keep doing it, and you keep running your loops, and then you ask for the order a third time, then a fourth time, and then eventually you say with the utmost sincerity at the right time, just give me one shot, and believe me, you will not be sorry. Sound fair enough? And bam, just like that out of nowhere, they're like, all right, sure, I'll do it. That's how it happens. They say no, 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 and all of a sudden, bam, they say yes. And it might have been that one little statement, a pennyweight at the end of the scale, That little tiny thing, that last negative you knocked off, that caused them to make that final shift. It could have been one more positive you piled on, but most of the work, in fact, almost all of the work was done before they finally said yes. It was just done below the waterline, below the surface. But before we actually close, I want to just go back to this idea of pain for one more second and how your pain threshold and your action threshold interrelate. Essentially what happens is, please put the picture up of the scales, the fulcrum. Okay, now notice here, the fulcrum in a typical scale is where? Right in the middle. That's where your fulcrum is. What happens essentially is someone that has a very high action threshold, the fulcrum will not be in the middle. The fulcrum is very, very far over to the side of positives. In other words, the positives get very little weight to them. When you put a positive on, nothing really happens because the bulk of the scale is on the other side of the fulcrum. So someone with a high action threshold, each positive doesn't really matter that much, and even one tiny negative has massive consequences. That's what a high action threshold is. So if someone with a low action threshold, their fulcrum is on one side of the scale. Someone with a very high action threshold, it's on the other side of the scale. And essentially what you do with the pain threshold is when you add it on, you're essentially moving the fulcrum back into the middle again. And when you do that, what happens? The force is massively increased on what you already did, and boom, the sale closes. Okay? And that essentially is the straight line, logically, in a nutshell. Now, in the next module we do, which is real tactic, is looping, you're going to see the straight line at a whole different level of intensity, of certainty in me. I'll be really kind of, getting into this sort of hardcore aspects of it and showing you truly how to use this stuff to close anyone who's closable. But for right now, just focus on just grasping the fundamentals one by one separately at first, and then slowly but surely as we go through all the other modules here, we're going to put the pieces together. And I promise you one thing, if you practice this even this much, you will quickly get to the point where you'll be able to close anyone who's closable. And that is truly what the straight line is all about. So now that we've talked about how to use tonality, let's look at the other element of developing rapport, which is body language. And what this is about, it's the competency of having impact. How do you make a positive impression on someone, right away in those first couple of seconds and build that massive conscious and unconscious rapport? Now, one thing I will tell you is that nonverbal communication is literally 10 times more powerful than verbal communication. Feeling, intention, thought, they're all communicated in the way that you move your body by the management of space, of time, your posture, your appearance, the gestures that you make, your facial expressions, the way you make eye contact with someone, even smell. All of that gets processed in a microsecond when you're speaking to someone and they're laying eyes on you for the first time. Now, it's not so much that effective body language will close the deal for you. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that ineffective body language will blow the deal for you. What it does, it stops you or it simply doesn't allow you to get into rapport with someone else. They are repelled by what they see. Now, as I said before, when a person lays eyes on you for the first time, bam, in that first 1/24th of a second, that judgment indicator goes up and down. They see your face, they see how you move, and they make a judgment. Essentially, they rip you apart, they kind of process you in their brain, they put you back together, and you are judged. Now, either you are judged as being a person that's sharp, on the ball, someone they want to do business with, or you're judged as someone they do not want to do business with, someone that simply repels them, someone they do not perceive as being an expert, someone they do not perceive as being sharp and enthusiastic, all the things that you need to, bam, get into that tight rapport. Now, I want to tell you a little story here, just to illustrate to you exactly how repulsive negative body language can be. And it's a story about a seminar I gave in, of all places, Sydney, Australia, one of my favorite cities in the world. And I just gone through the whole section on body language in detail. I mean, really delved into all the particulars of eye contact, how you shake hands, how close you stand to somebody. And that last issue of how close you stand, I was just literally on it for like 15 minutes, calling people on stage. And allowing people to experience for themselves how awful it feels when someone really gets into your space bubble and invades it, right? So everyone's saying, yeah, I get it. And I can just see the audience gets it. You just know that everyone's right in tune. So I take a short break, and as soon as I walk off the stage, some wacky Australian guy comes running up to me with their thick accent. Yo, mate. And he gets right in my face. Mate, I got this thing. I'm like, oh my God. And the guy invades my face, like right there. And he's like, right to me. He's like, I got this thing, mate. I got this thing. Mate. I'm like, oh my God, please, I want to kill myself. And I already had tuned out. And somehow the guy's like, as I'm tuning out and like covering my, trying to stop the spit, the guy tries to explain to me, he has this revolutionary invention called the express loo. I'm like, well, what's an express loo? Oh, it's a porta potty for 5-year-olds. I'm like, a porta potty for 5-year-olds? He wants to demonstrate to me how you actually sit on this little wooden porta potty, right? Anyway, long story short, we'll cut to the point here. He ends up corralling not just me, but my manager, who's Australian, my seminar promoter. Every person he sees, he just runs up to them, gets right in their face, and every person walks away with that same exact feeling, which is, I don't know about his product, but I would never do business with this guy in a million years. Well, the bottom line is this. Body language is not going to get you the sale, but the wrong body language will destroy the opportunity for you to make a sale. Let's get specific here. I'll tell you exactly some of the do's and don'ts of body language and really how it works and how it impacts the person you're trying to influence. Now, again, I've said this about 3 or 4 times already, so I'll say it again. Face to face, you have only 1/24th of a second before you've been judged by the way you look and the way you carry yourself. In that time, you've been dissected, you've been assessed, you've been reassessed, you've been packaged, compartmentalized in this spot of either someone that they want to do business with or someone they simply don't want to talk to at all. And from that point forward, either you're reaping the rewards of having a positive image in the person's mind, or you're playing catch-up ball and trying to fight your way out of this negative situation. Now, let me talk about myself for a second. Regardless of whatever context I'm in, whether it's a selling situation, a training situation, speaking on stage as a keynote speech, I always make sure that I present a professional, smart, clean appearance. Well-dressed, well-groomed, presentable, my hair's got to be trimmed, I'm not going to have a beard, any facial hair. It simply would not be congruent with the message that I'm trying to put out there, which is a corporate message. Even if I make jokes and I'm funny, I'm always aware that that first impression of me has got to be one that they expect, which would be sort of like a Wall Street guy, a guy who is dressed as a banker. It doesn't matter whether all day long I'm not acting as a banker anymore. I have to have that first, that impression, that impact that causes someone's brain to just say, blip up, everything makes sense. This guy is as I expected him to be. And seriously, many salespeople completely overlook the importance of body language as a skill to sell, as a skill to get into rapport, and they simply find themselves playing catch-up ball in a sale. They'll make a negative first impression with body language, then they can't figure out why the person is turned off, and then they're talking a mile a minute and trying every trick in the book, so to speak, to get themselves back into rapport. Now, one thing I will tell you is that even when you're on the phone and they can't see you, body language is still important because it comes through in the tone of your voice. I spoke about this on part 1 of this module, how the gestures that we make affect the tonality that comes out of our mouth. So again, you want to make sure that you're moving your body and holding your body in a way that's going to be creating the right mental image in the person's mind. Now, along those lines, I want to get into something very, very important here for salespeople. That's something I call wrapping your package. In other words, always dressing for success versus dressing for failure. How good you look determines how good you feel inside. You want to look sharp, but not too frilly or ostentatious. In other words, there's a suit that I wear, right? Blue neutral suit. conservative versus sort of a Sharpie suit where I have this, spread collar and I have, thick gray pinstripes. It looks like a mobster suit almost. If you saw me wearing that suit, you'd say, whoa, 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 what's wrong with this guy? I don't trust the guy. So I'm not talking about just wearing any suit, but an appropriate conservative business suit that it would expect someone like me to wear. Now for men, that's a dark suit with a solid colored shirt and a matching tie, all of which together exemplifies what people perceive as an authority figure. For women in the workplace, this notion that sex sells is just not true in the workplace. Women shouldn't be wearing mini skirts and spiked heels and, that stuff they would wear out at nighttime going to a club. A woman should wear, a skirt below the knee or just above or below the knee, typically below the knee. Neutral colors, red's a power suit, so dark colors, black, blue, okay, it's, very power suits for women. And again, dark suits for men, ties is really your preferred dress code in the business world. But again, if you're a plumber, of course, you want to be in uniform, so you have to have some common sense here. Now let's talk about colors just for a second. I don't want to get into this ad nauseum, but you just got to be smart. There are certain colors that are for business, and they're basically black and blue. You're not going to be wearing a bone white suit or a fire engine red suit out. And again, if you do that, it's not like you can never close a sale, but you're going to be playing some serious catch-up ball with the people you're trying to influence if they look at you and say, what the hell is this guy wearing? More than anything, the general rule of thumb is this. You don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. You want to dress as expected. You want to dress comfortably. You want to feel that it's still you congruent with who you are, but you do not want to go into a business meeting dressed like you were a pit boss in a casino. Understand the difference? There are just certain do's and don'ts. They're very logical, they're very basic, but just don't shoot yourself in the foot by dressing inappropriately for a business meeting. Next, handshakes. How you actually shake someone's hand says a lot about who you are in a business setting. The best handshake is your basic, natural handshake. We call this the cooperator's handshake. And what you do is very simple. You shake the hand at waist level using the same pressure that the other person uses. You want to grip the hand firmly, but don't hold it too tightly. You don't want to squeeze their fist till they're like, nice to meet you, right? You want to lightly pump the other hand once or twice, then simply let it go. You want to avoid the nice to clear meet you handshake with the other person shaking like a rag doll, right? That's too aggressive. And also, you want to avoid the passive wimpy handshake, which is like, hi, nice to meet you, and you basically give them two fingers, you're like the dead fish handshake, right? And I will tell you, there's been studies on this. It sounds wacky, but there's been scientific studies that people that receive the wrong handshake, they are completely turned off as soon as the handshake is over. They're like, oh, that person's an idiot, or I don't like that person. It says a lot about who you are. And believe it or not, the wimpy handshake, it doesn't mean that you're a wimp. It means that you don't care about the other person. That's what it tells the person, oh, they think they're superior. They're not even worthy. I'm not worthy of getting a real handshake from them. So again, be very careful that when you shake someone's hand, don't go over, you don't go under. It's a neutral handshake, waist level, 1-2 pumps. Then you let it go and you begin the conversation. Now, quickly here, I just want to give you kind of a recap of this whole section with body language. It might seem a bit wacky to you that I'm spending 2 minutes talking about a handshake, 3 minutes talking about how far you stand from someone, who you stand at an angle, face to face. It seems kind of ridiculous. But here's the bottom line. It works. This makes a profound difference on whether you're going to get into rapport with somebody or not get into rapport with somebody. So you just want to use these tools to give yourself that edge. I mean, why not do this stuff if it works? And, for me, sometimes I say, wow, I'm not really comfortable with some of this stuff. I don't like dressing for success all the time. And, I don't always want to be conscious of standing in an angle or standing face to face. But I'll tell you this, I've learned over the years that by using these tools, I make my life easier down the road, meaning when I'm actually trying to close somebody. Because on that unconscious level, they simply feel some connection to me. And it makes everything else I do that much easier. So it just goes a long way to developing that image of a person that I want to do business with, someone that I would trust, someone that is worth listening to. Now, the next subject I want to discuss is something called matching and mirroring. Okay, let me explain to you exactly what matching and mirroring is. It's a way of you getting into really unconscious rapport with another person by matching their physiology and matching their tonality. So watch. You're sitting here talking right now, and your legs are crossed like this, your head's like this. So if I want to get in, so I cross my legs, and I have a book, and I start to get and adopt your physiology. And believe it or not, it's actually powerful when we adopt the same physiology. If I see you blinking at a certain rate, I'll blink at a certain rate. And by doing that, I can actually get into rapport with you at a very deep level. Matching means that I'll basically watch what you do, and I'll slowly, now watch, now go back to where you are. Okay, watch. So you're here, and after a few seconds, I ended up in the same spot. So now move to another spot. So you do that, right? And we start talking. And I say, anyway, so typically what happens is over time, as we start to talk more, I'll eventually start to match your, and now you see, I wait a while, and then I'll adopt your physiology again. And before I know it, I'm back in the same physiology. Now go back again, okay? Now watch, that's matching. Now let's watch mirroring, which is really obnoxious. Here's mirroring. Go move your body.
That's really confronting.
Yeah. Listen, I've had someone try, not people like, so, they teach mirroring. I'm like, I don't agree with it. I think it's really rude, okay? But, there's some people that think that by mirroring you can get into really tight, they scratch your face, you just come, you let the smile. It's funny, right? But that's what it really is. So I'm a believer in matching. I'm not a big believer in mirroring, okay? And if you do get caught mirroring, you're just like such a fool. Now, let me explain the precise difference between matching and mirroring. Now, once you enter a prospect's world where they are, you'll notice that they actually change physiologies, they change their body language, they might speed up their voice a bit, they might lean in one direction, maybe they'll fold their arms, they'll unfold their arms, they'll cross their legs, right? So now when you're matching somebody, what it means is you look at them and you wait for them to change, and you take a pause, and then you match them. So let's say I'm talking to someone face to face, and then all of a sudden they go, So I would wait for a couple of seconds, and then slowly I would put my hand on my own chin, and I've now matched their physiology. If you're actually engaged in mirroring somebody, you try to time it so when they're moving their hand, you start moving your own hand to almost mirror their activity. Now, I will tell you this, mirroring is a very, very dicey subject. I don't believe that much in mirroring. If you get caught mirroring somebody, they will think you're the biggest moron in the world. So you're going to be very, very elegant if you're going to engage in any mirroring. So to me, the more elegant form of this is matching, and that means to wait a little bit, give it a couple of seconds, and then you slowly adopt the person's physiology. Let me give you an example. Just tonight, or whenever you go to a bar the next time, to a restaurant, just notice that if you see any two people sitting there at a bar, and they're in rapport, they'll adopt the same physiology. They'll both be leaning on their hands, they'll both have their arms locked, they'll both be breathing at the same rate. You'll notice that people that are in rapport will start to match each other. So how do we use this now in the business world? Well, let's just say you walk into a room and the person essentially is not in rapport with you, right? What you do is you start to match their physiology, you match their breathing, you match their speed of speech, their tone of voice, and what happens slowly, just unconsciously, that connection begins to develop. Okay, so again, it's about getting into a prospect's life where they are, and then kind of waiting for them to make a change, and then matching them. So again, mirroring, matching, they're both out there, but the more elegant, the more effective way to go about getting into unconscious rapport is through the art of matching. So the next thing I want to cover is something called pacing and leading, which is an absolutely crucial skill that you must master because it helps you get to that level of unconscious rapport where you can move somebody emotionally without them even knowing it. Now, I'll give you an example of pacing and leading here. It's about my son Carter when he was 11 years old. So it's a great story. It takes place 5 or 6 years ago, and Carter was a great soccer player playing on a club team, and there was one kid on his team who was a notorious ball hog and a pusher and a shover and an elbower, right? And I know Carter didn't really like this kid, but one day I came home from work and my partner, my now fiance, she goes, Carter is downstairs and he is so angry and ticked off. He's yelling. He's literally spitting nails. He is so upset about this kid, Andreas. And I'm like, really? He's like, oh my, I said, all right, let me go down and let me try to talk to my son and try to reason with him. So I go down there and I'm like, hey, buddy, what's going on? He's like, no, nothing's going on. I am so angry. I'm so ticked off. This kid, Andreas, he said, I said, calm down, Carter. No, I'm not calmed down. I'm like, how could you ask me to calm down in a moment like this? This kid's a menace. He's ruining my life. I said, Carter, it's not that. It is worse than that. And now, on and on it goes. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that myself knowing what I know about human communication, do you think I actually did that? Do you think I went downstairs while my son was in this unbelievably angry, ticked off state, and I tried to be nice and calm and sweet? Of course I didn't. When you try that with somebody, when you try to enter someone's world where they're not, typically will even get angrier or they'll go more in the direction where they already are. So I did exactly the opposite. So I go down there and do exactly this. I'm like, Carter, what's going on right now? He goes, Dad, I am so off about this kid. I said, don't even tell me. That kid Andres, he's a menace. I am going to talk to this kid's father. I said, Carter. He goes, yeah. I said, Carter, this kid's a menace. What are we going to do about this kid Andreas? I just don't know. And Carter's like, I don't know either. I'm like, wow, you think maybe Andreas has got some of his own emotional problems maybe? And Carter's like, yeah, I think he does. And just like that, by entering Carter's world exactly where he was, I paced him. In fact, I even got angrier than where he was. I paced him, and then I led him exactly where I wanted to go, which is to a place of calmness, a place of understanding, compassion almost. And because I entered his world at the right spot and moved him where I wanted to go slowly and deliberately, bam, I got to him, and he ended up exactly where I want him to be and where he should be, which is a state of calm and a state of compassion. That's a classic example of pacing and leading at the highest possible level. Now, understand this. With pacing and leading, there's two types of pacing and leading. There's pace, lead, which you might have heard about somewhere else, where they, say, match them where they are, and then move them where you want to go. That's one way. And then there's pace, lead on steroids, ninja style, where I'm saying you actually get right in there and you really mirror them. It's one of those things where if it's done exactly right, it works like a charm. And if it's done half-heartedly, it hardly works at all. So when we're talking about pace, lead, I want you to understand is that emotional state, the body language, the tonality, you have to mirror your subject, right? You match them, pace them, you pace them, and then you slowly lead them where you want them to go. And believe me, if you do it effectively, the results are truly staggering. Pacing and leading is something that is, let's just say it's incredibly effective when it's done correctly and totally worthless when it's done ineffectively. So let me just go through pacing and leading one more time and explain it on a bit deeper level. So step one about pacing and leading is you enter a prospect's world where they are. So if you're speaking at a certain voice and timbre and at a certain rate of speech, if you're breathing at a certain level, deep breather or shallow breather, if you're standing a certain way, if you have a certain level of certainty in your voice or excitement, then when I start to influence you, my goal is to influence you, when I first make my move, I don't start by sounding 5 times as enthusiastic. I start off and I enter your world of certainty. Let's use certainty for this particular instance. I enter your world of certainty where you are. So if you're at a 7, let's say you're at a 7 of certainty, which would mean, yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. Versus a 10 would be, oh my God, that's the best idea since sliced bread, right? So like, yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. Slightly more than ambivalent. So I wouldn't say to you, if you said to me, that's a pretty good idea, I wouldn't say exactly
because you would unconsciously say, he's not hearing me, or we break rapport. So instead, if you say, it sounds pretty good, I say, exactly. And I enter your world. And say, and let me say this, Victoria, the true beauty of the program is X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Now that was in the same level of certainty as we started. In fact, 4 years ago, this other company came in and they were also at X, Y, Z, and then they went to ABC 1, 2, 3. Now, the key with that is after they went to ABC, now I'm a little bit higher. They went here, and then afterwards, when that happened, 2 other companies just like them, they got it. All 4 of them went around, and they all made massive money. So when we look at that in return to what you're doing, don't you see what I see? And I'm making up the words, don't matter. Don't you see what I see? Do you see how all 4 of those things totally wrap up into this one amazing opportunity? You follow what I'm saying? And you'll say, oh, no, yeah. And you'll jump in, and you'll now match me. You'll try to, because I paced you, and then I started leading you in the direction of where I wanted you to go. That's pacing and leading at a very high level. So it's got to be, you enter their world where they are, you pace, and you lead. Okay?
Now, I made up some funny words there. It's this and that and that and this to illustrate a point that the words are really not the most important thing here, because we're talking about moving somebody emotionally using tonality. But of course, the words matter too. If you're spewing out nonsense, the process is going to say, this guy is full of nonsense, right? So the words have to be perfect as well, and we'll discuss that when we talk about how to write amazing scripts that actually close people versus scripts that repel people. So we'll get to that later, but in terms of right now, I want to focus on the tonal aspects of what we're doing here, and how by shifting your own tone through this process of pacing someone, and then pacing them again, and then actually leading them to where you want them to go, bam, you move them to a place of emotional certainty, and they don't even know why. So watch again. Let me show it to you very slowly this time. You say to somebody, does my product make sense to you? Do you like my product? And again, you wouldn't use those exact words, but I'm just illustrating a point, and they say, yeah, it sounds pretty good. Now, think about that. They say, yeah, it sounds pretty good. On a scale of certainty, now watch us draw it out for a second here. Let's say we have uncertainty over here, okay, which means, no, I hate your product. And then here we have, let's call this absolute certainty, right? Whereas, oh my God, your product is the best thing in the world, right? Obviously, as an influencer, we're looking to move people from uncertainty to absolute certainty. So let's call 1 would be absolute uncertainty. They hate your product, it's the worst thing in the world. Would anybody ever buy here? No, they're not going to buy if they hate your product. On the other end of the continuum, we have absolute certainty, where they love your product, they think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Now, here's the deal. There's actually 2 types of absolute certainty. You have logical absolute certainty. What I mean by that is they've actually made the mental calculations, they've figured out all the features, the benefits, how much it costs, and they weigh it out and say, yeah, this really does make sense. That's logical certainty. Then there's something even more profound, which is called emotional certainty. And that means for some gut reason, they just say to themselves, yeah, I gotta have it. This thing's unbelievable. Oh my God, gotta have it. That's emotional certainty. As an influencer using the straight line, and the reason we're able to close anybody who's closable is because as we move them down the straight line from the open to the close, we're not just building up logical certainty, and we're not just building up emotional certainty. We're building up both at the same time. And what happens is it's the words that move them logically, and it's your tone of voice that moves them emotionally. So by combining the right words and then adding on the process of pacing and leading, we're able to move them both logically and emotionally to a place of absolute certainty. And when we get them to that spot where they're just like, they're like, yeah, wow, it makes sense logically, but they're also like, I gotta have this now. This is just, wow, yeah, this is, wow. They can't even verbalize. That's emotional certainty. Then your closing rate skyrockets through the roof. So again, this process of pacing and leading, you pace, and then you lead them where you want them to go, and you create that emotional certainty that at the end of the day is what closes the sale. Now, in closing, I want you to remember that the straight line is an exact sequence of how you go from point A to point B, from the open to the close. And again, it's driven by your ability to get into conscious and unconscious rapport and maintain that rapport with your prospects by using effective tonality and appropriate body language. Now, remember, you'll find at various points along the way that you'll have these little dips in rapport. And the idea is to recognize those dips, slow down, and get yourself back into rapport, and then build that rapport to an even higher level, and then move forward. And also, of course, rapport does not mean going off into Pluto, where you're just taking the conversation away from the straight line. Remember, make sure you review the competencies associated with this module and complete the exercises to put the straight line into action. And as you watch the critical incident scenarios, notice the body language and tonality, and you'll see how by making significant... Hey, welcome back, and welcome to the module on looping, which is the strategy, or more accurately, the secret sauce I created for the back half of the straight line system. Essentially, what looping allows you to do is take a prospect who's sitting on the fence after you've made your initial pitch, meaning you've asked for the order and they've come back to you with something along the lines of they want to think about it, or call you back, or talk to their wife, or one of the other dozen typical objections that we always hear. And you continue to move them down the straight line from the open to the close in a way that doesn't break rapport with them and hence blow the sale. And typically that's what happens during this so-called objection handling phase of the sale. A salesman tends to break rapport with his prospect, but through the process of looping, a salesman can stay in tight rapport with their prospect while answering all of their objections as they simultaneously continue to move the prospect down the straight line from the open to the close. Essentially, it's that point in the sale where you've already been through your initial qualifying pitch, which means you should be in tight rapport with your prospect already, both on a conscious and an unconscious level, right? Then you've used that tight rapport to gather intelligence, which includes identifying needs and also finding out where their pain lies and amplifying it if necessary. And remember, you didn't try to solve their pain at this point. You left the wound open, or maybe even dug into it a bit, so to be that much more open to hearing about your solution. And then you laid out that solution for them by the main body of your script, which you kept short and sweet, right? You didn't front load your benefits. You simply laid out the basics of a very compelling solution, kept the bulk of your powder dry, and then you ended the pitch with some urgency, and then calmly asked for your order using a simple yet extremely effective language pattern from the ones I gave you. Something like, and believe me, John, if you do even half as well as the rest of my clients in this program, the only problem you'll have is that you didn't buy more. Sound fair enough? And of course, those last few words, right, you use the reasonable man tone, so it sounded like, sound fair enough, not like you're daring the guy to disagree, like, sound fair enough, go ahead, make my day, that's not what you're doing. It's calm, cool, collected, the reasonable man tone. So basically, you were smooth as silk, almost to the point where your tonality was so calm and so reasonable that only a complete moron with no social graces would be rude enough to say no to you. And that's exactly what your goal is here, is to make it so easy for him and so low pressure that he feels almost compelled to cave in right there on the spot and give you the order the very first time you ask for it. It's basically that perfect mix of just the right words, just the right tonality to literally ease someone down the straight line to a completely objectionless close, where they just say yes right out of the gate. Now, it would be great if sales actually worked that way, meaning you could actually execute the front half of the sale perfectly and eliminate the need for the back half of the sale, right? But it just doesn't work that way. No matter how great you sound, no matter how on target your words were, the prospect is still going to hit you with some sort of objection, even if he's forced to conjure up a completely bogus one. You see, it's very, very rare that a prospect will come straight out and tell you what's truly holding them back. And of course, we know what it is from the earlier modules, right? What's holding them back is either they're not certain enough about one of the 3 10s,
or perhaps they have a very, very high action threshold that's stopping them from taking action, even though they know they should be taking action, right? Instead, they'll come up with objections, and then more objections, and more objections. He'll say he still needs to think about it, or call back, or he's got to do some research, or talk with his wife, or his attorney, or his accountant, or wait for a better time of year, like after tax time, or when it's closer to Groundhog's Day, or when Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy is giving him the all-clear sign. You get my point? When you ask for the order that first time, you have to be prepared to handle objection after objection after objection. You get it? Now, the danger here is that this is the spot where a typical salesman ends up plunging into the so-called death spiral. It starts with the prospect giving him a bogus objection, to which the salesman spits back a canned response designed to overcome that objection. Then the salesman asks for the order again, to which the prospect, who just got an answer to a question that he really didn't even care about in the first place, was a bogus objection, right? He has no choice now but to give the salesman yet another bogus objection, to which the salesman then spits out yet another canned response and asks for the order again, which then forces the prospect to come up with yet another bogus objection, and on we go. The sort of death spiral where the prospect isn't being honest with you. He's just, he's saying he's got to talk to his wife, or he's got to do this, he's got to do that. That's not what's holding him back. What's holding him back is that he's just not certain enough yet. It could be about the product, it could be about you, it could be about your company, it could be as a very high action threshold, maybe he's in denial of his pain. But what's holding him back is not that he actually has to think about it. That's the stall, it's the smoke screen. It's what lies underneath. That's where the magic is that allows you to close the sale. And this process of looping, what it's going to do is going to show you how to quickly and elegantly essentially get past those initial objections and seamlessly transition into the very heart of what holds someone back from making a positive buying decision. And that, my friend, is certainty. Looping will show you how to build absolute certainty in your client's heart, in their mind, both logically and emotionally, and at the same time, you're moving them down the straight line from the open to the close until you've gotten to that point where they're so certain, essentially, that their certainties exceeded their action threshold, and bam, everybody starts to buy. That's the process of looping.